Welcome back to our 17th episode of the Launch Your Farm Show, where I interview Ryan Hodge with the Realty Firm in London. Today, Ryan and I discuss how he went from working as a new agent with RE/MAX and watching other agents in the company succeed to mirroring what the top agents were doing and growing his business drastically. Ryan shares how he built his own real estate business by heavily flyering his farm area and how he built a huge business by focusing on getting listings, and then he built his team around that. In this episode, Ryan and I talk about why staying consistent with your message and marketing efforts is critical to your success. Ryan shares how he focused on listings so that he could grow his team and buy back his time. Ryan also talks about what marketing message he prefers that has continually gotten him leads year after year. He also shares a super easy way to plan out your marketing for the year to ensure you stick with your plan. And we also talk about how to calculate if your marketing is working and what you should be spending to ensure that your marketing is worth it. Plus, we talk about a ton of other ideas that you can use to grow your geographic farm. So be sure to check out this episode, like and subscribe, and enjoy the episode with Ryan. Thanks for joining us on another episode of the Launch Your Farm Show. I'm your host, Ryan Smith, and today we got a great guest. It's Ryan Hodge. You kind of have a jack of all trades, so I'll let you kind of introduce yourself and explain who you are and what you're about. So take a minute and tell us a bit about yourself and your business.
Sure. Well, first and foremost, it's an honor to be here and contribute. I've been watching what you're doing, so congrats on the amazing things and supporting the industry on the overall. Always happy to serve and support, share both successes and challenges inside and outside of real estate. I try and be as transparent as possible. And so, about me, born and raised in London, Ontario. Went to high school here, university here. Currently, after a long, strictly sales career, I now own a real estate brokerage called the Realty Firm. So we're an office of close to 100 agents. We've got a physical location in London, Ontario, Woodstock, Ontario, and we are also in several other boards in and around southwestern Ontario anyways. So I continue to operate, a small team inside of that. Yep. Support our members and, learning, training, growth, all things real estate brokerage. Yep. And then I've also been fortunate to, do some coaching and consulting through my company, Ryan Hodge Coaching and Consulting. And I've been able to get out and contribute all over North America and even into Europe.
Awesome. Yeah, you've had a really interesting career, and I've been watching it for a number of years, and to see the kind of evolution and just to see the value you bring. And today, obviously, we're talking about farming. So let's go back to kind of the history for yourself and what that looked like at the beginning for your own personal career, and how did you get started in farming and why?
Sure. I found that when I got into real estate, I was told that you can be a top producer, whatever that means. We talked a little bit about that before we jumped on, by spending a fortune in marketing or, making a couple hundred cold calls a day. Yeah. And I very quickly realized that there's so many different ways to do the business. Yeah. And so I had a benefit of subcontracting, my previous career, which was a sales manager in the jewelry manufacturing space. Okay. So that I had a little bit of resources that I could get out and try things, through social media, which was kind of up and coming now because it's 13 years ago that I got into the business. Yeah. Online lead generation, doing, some of the, the scripts and conversion. But I did study primarily outside of my market, those that were having success, and the vast majority of, the highly productive realtor was doing some form of geographical farming. Yeah. So I think it was just, that element of testing and measuring things, finding out what works, what feels good. Yep. And farming was one of the first, business cultivation or lead generation streams that I definitely started to explore.
And I find a lot of people kind of hear about farming when they get started. They get in the business and they work at a brokerage, and their boss or whoever tells them, like you said, it's cold call or go farm. And then a lot of people are turned off from farming because they hear it costs a fortune or it's going to take forever to see the results. But the agents that do it and have done it and done well with it, like you said, are usually those top producers because they stick with it and they really grow a solid business. Sure. So for you, when you got started, what did it look like? Because I know some agents struggle with, how do I actually get going? How do I figure it out? What do I start with and how do I test it out? So how did that look like for you when you in the early days?
Well, I'm a big believer in emulate before you innovate. So, although I was getting a lot of, mailers sent, even to my own house or the things I was observing in my market, I reached out or searched out, some of the most highly productive real estate people on the planet. At the time, Craig Proctor was really big. But I really looked at people like Terry Peranich, who Terry was at the time, I think, #1 Remax in Canada or even the world. Here's somebody that was sending out a couple 100,000 flyers, which was way beyond my budget at the time, and examining, what that looked like. So not just frequency or things like that, but what did their postcards look like? What were they offering? What were the key calls to action? And I basically just duplicated, I got some mentoring from people like that.
Yep.
They said, this is what works in our market. And I would just try it and see how it went. And I started getting reasonably decent calls right out of the gates.
Yeah. That's awesome.
So I was kind of fortunate, and it also led to what I would refer as, instant credibility.
Yep. Where
even though I was new to real estate, many people thought that I was in it for, 5 years or 10 years, or, I was that top producer, even though at the time I wasn't necessarily right out of the starting point.
And to that point, exactly what you said, is finding the right message, I think, is critical. And I've said this for years, that the cost to send a postcard with the wrong message is the same cost as to send a postcard with the right message. And getting that right message, the right call to action, the right positioning of yourself in the community is one of the most critical points, because you can send stuff and send a ton of stuff without hitting the right people with the right message. You really are throwing away money. Now, you may see results, but you're not going to see the results that's going to be worth it. So when you got started with those things, how long, you said you're getting results right away. How long did it take for you to build up that credibility where they're like, okay, you're the person to talk to in the area?
Well, I mean, I had a unique story, within my first 3 years, through all the different means, my small team and I were about 200 homes in 3 years. So that's pretty quick out of the gates. Yeah. I used to look at it as, 100 homes in the first full year, but just when they close, not 200 homes in the first 3 years is what we looked at. About 50 of those deals in the first 3 years came from geographical farming. And at that time it was, between about 8,000 and 10,000 homes. Okay. Out of the gates, I had to go a lot more frequent, and then I could kind of tail back as we went along. Yep. And so, a big portion of the business came from that. And eventually I think that, the general public didn't really recognize what was what as far as the marketing, in terms of really understanding it. Yeah. So when I say instant credibility, some people thought that I, owned the Remax in London, or, like owned, like some big brand, where I was just, a sales agent with, one buyer team partner and an admin, and we were just selling a lot of real estate.
Yeah, and that's the magic of farming, is by hitting the right amount of times, the right people with the right message. Mm-hmm. You build that trust. I share my story all the time with the Orchard. I brand myself as the neighborhood expert, as I call it, the Orchard Home Team. And our first listing we got, and she said, "Oh, you guys are the experts." And then the next listing, "Well, you're the experts. You tell me." And it's like, I'd never even sold a home in that neighborhood before, but with the right message, the right amount of times, people just start seeing you as that person. And it's not that it's a lie, but it's you're building credibility in their minds. And if you're just shooting off messages here and there, you're not going to get that same results.
Sure.
So for you, obviously you started with, you said 5 to 8,000 homes. What did it look like before you started kind of expanding it, and why did you make that move to expand?
Well, I mean, I was fortunate, through the Remax network, I got to go out and speak at, a number of their conferences and really engage with some highly productive people. I started looking at, those that were having some pretty massive success, and in areas that were similar to mine, a lower price point, not necessarily GTA or, the $1 million average. We were about 220 to 250,000 average sale price at the time. Yeah. And so I just started looking at, if something's working, why not just, scale it, right? Yeah. Scale it with technology, other human beings, Yeah. And so that's really what I did. I looked to those that were doing a little bit of a higher frequency. So, from, I think, 8,000 went to 16,000 to 25. The most I ever did at one point was 40,000. Wow. I started changing my boring free market evaluation flyer to, different things that I was seeing, which would work and which wouldn't.
Yep.
I still stand by the free market evaluation flyer for myself. It's not as niche. It's more of a blanket brand type of strategy.
Yep.
And, the cost versus even doing my own newspaper, which at one point was going up to 40,000 homes, was drastically different.
Wow.
So through the years, I think that, flyering and farming, pros and cons to it, depending on what kind of market you're in. We've here been experiencing a very hot, low inventory sellers market over the last 3 to 5 years, really. And so definitely seen a drop, but there's a strategy inside of that too, with staying consistent, staying committed to the path, knowing that, most agents that have been doing it that don't see a result are quitting, which we observe in our flyer areas. And so even though our results aren't near what they have been in years past, that commitment often will lead to picking up market share in future years.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing with farming, is that you got to stay committed to it, even in the highs and lows. Generally, you can kind of get an average of what you're going to get, and then you can tweak as you go along. But there are going to be some years where it may not be as hot as the year before, depending on the market trends and stuff. For you though, when you like, what did you need to see before you started expanding, and what did you need to see when you scaled back? Like, what was the deciding factors on, hey, we want to spend more versus, hey, we're spending too much here?
So I think that when I looked at, the expansion factor, it was pretty simple. I mean, we were measuring, year to year, each year, and really healthy return on investment meant that we could move forward.
Okay.
When I really switched the type of marketing piece, the cost basically tripled.
Yeah.
So a bit of a downturn in the market, which meant, a downturn in the flyer calls. And so you went from a really heavy return on investment where you're scaling upwards to almost having some kind of a form of marketing sink you in a way, which, made us scale back. So it's constantly tracking, measuring, and seeing, when and where we can improve it. And for me on flyers, it's simple return on investment.
Yeah.
Is it making money? Is it not? Is it, are some areas, a break even one year where other areas are really creating a high return? I think that there's so many other ways that you can do it that are a lower cost, but I wanted to focus only on listings. Yeah. After my first year in the business, very rarely did I work with a buyer, period. Yeah. I started a team, scaled that team, more people, more leads, more flyers. And so it was just kind of playing around with it, having some fun, but really tracking and measuring those analytics so that I would see the success.
Yeah, I think that's critical what you said about being specific to what you're looking for. You knew you were after listings, and being critical with your time, because at some point it comes down to time and money. And yes, it may cost you more money, but if you can buy yourself time, at the end of the day, that's really where we want to be, in that position of having more time to be able to do the things you do and service more people, because that's where the money's made, and leveraging your time correctly to grow the business. So one of the things I want to ask you is about the messaging itself, because I find that that's a lot of agents get hung up on, what do I send? How often do I send it? And what kind of message? And they either don't track people that, or they don't follow people that are doing it successfully. They just they do their own creativity thing, and then they don't get the results. What did it look like for you as far as messaging goes, and how often were you sending?
When we look at the messaging, I have watched so many people try and do it, as far as being so different on every flyer, that I think over time it dilutes what this is actually meant to be, which was really truly power branding yourself into an area that you become the obvious choice for, all things real estate. Yeah. So Terry Peranich, who I mentioned, he talked about burning your brand in, which was for me, starting out in an area with a once a week, flyer out for usually 4 to 8 weeks, followed up by once every 2 weeks, and then usually every 3 to 4 weeks after that, depending on how the results were going. It's nice to be able to go every 4 weeks, but I find sometimes you got to be a little bit more frequent than that. Yeah. Good friend of mine, Mark Arnstein, he's in the GTA, does huge numbers, high price point. He's every 10 days.
Wow. So
I think that it's looking at what works for each individual and examining those results. I always went with the free market evaluation flyer. Yep. So free home evaluation, No cost, no obligation, a little bit as far as how we market to the masses.
Yep.
And I never changed it. I've tried different things, following along with, the guaranteed sale programs or ideas like that. What I share is that I just never got a really good response from that. I know some people got tremendous response, but over the years, I may have had only a handful of people that actually asked me about that program. And I think that kind of program needs to be structured very well also.
Yes.
Just as far as, the proper way of utilizing it.
Yeah.
So for me, it wasn't even a guaranteed, sold or I'll buy it. It was guaranteed sold or I'll sell it for free, which would mean that I eliminated, my side of the commission.
Yep.
Never had to use it.
Yeah.
And over time, I just looked at, do I really even want to deal with that if I have to? And I just moved away from it to keep things simple. So simple and consistent would be, the rocket science behind what I've done with flyers.
I think too, the benefit of having that consistent message too is from a printing cost is you can mass print them and get them cheaper instead of doing smaller batches. You can pre-plan 3 months, 6 months, whatever, and kind of have that ahead of time. Have you ever been burned by doing that? Because I've talked to some agents where they've printed a lot of stuff and then something happened or something changed and they got stuck with literally a trunk load of flyers and it kind of sucked for them. Have you ever had that happen?
Well, I'll share that, at one point I was printing about 1 million flyers a year up front. That was I've got a great printer. So my cost was right in and around $10,000 to $12,000 for that many flyers. Wow. All the same flyer, of course.
Yeah.
And I wasn't certain that I was going to do my own brokerage. But, we launched in September of 2013. So I probably had a good couple 100,000 flyers that went in the recycling somewhere. So
it's kind of painful.
not the end of the world. I mean, the positive outweighed the negative.
Yeah.
When that kind of thing happens, it's never really fun.
Yeah, I did that. I had an area we were kind of testing as a farm, and then we got out there, and then we both decided to pull the cord on it, and then I had, I think it was like 3,000 flyers in my trunk, and I was like, and I held on to them, and I thought, maybe I'll use these one day, who knows? Yeah. And then I kept them for like 3 years. I was like, I'm just I'll chuck them.
Yeah, eventually.
Stop doing business.
There's only so many bookmarks that you can use, right?
I jokingly, I said that I probably used more in gas keeping them in my trunk driving around than what I spent on them. But
totally.
So as far as getting them delivered, because depending on people's areas in Canada, we have Canada Post. Was that who you were using then for delivery?
Yes. Okay. So I would say that for the 12 years that I've used or that I've geographical flyered, Canada Post probably for 10 of those years. I tried using, it was called Star Mail here. So, kind of like Penny Saver or the flyer, like the actual, multi company flyers that go out.
Yep.
Way less costly, but a way less, number of calls that were coming in.
Yeah.
So Canada Post is still my go-to. I think that it's just, yes, it's costly, but that they're being delivered and that they're being seen because they're going out as individual flyers.
Have you ever tested hiring anyone? Like, I'll give you an example. So when we did ours, we did it with Canada Post and we kind of tracked our open rate or response rates. And then we ended up hiring some local kids. Now we didn't have tens of thousands. We had 30, I think it was 3,000 or something like that. And we actually hired the local kids and we broke them into kind of quadrants and we gave each kid about 600 and we got them to put them in the door. And the response rate was just way higher, way better. And we ended up paying a little bit more per. But it ended up being the time to manage it. And then we had kids that they were going to deliver them and they had hockey and they couldn't deliver it. So it was a bit of a nightmare as far as logistics goes, but the response rate was better. Have you ever tested trying with anyone else?
I've looked at it, but I haven't actually had somebody, deliver them in that manner. There's a company here that does do it.
Okay.
My concern was just always ensuring that they were 100% delivered, and delivered on time. Yeah. And there's been times with Canada Post even that we've had to go into the depot because they've mixed up postal runs or, they've doubled up in one area and made that error. They're usually really good at you getting a credit back, but you have to go through a process. It's just eliminating and minimizing the stress and the logistics of it. for me was crucial. I just want it very, very simple.
Yeah. And that's usually the best case where it's like, especially at that scale you're doing it, like when you add in all those little things that could go wrong at a large scale, you want it to be as simple and as easy as possible. So I want to talk about the conversions and the numbers, because I think a lot of people would want to know what can you expect and obviously what you've gotten from it. At a bare minimum, you were talking about breaking even, but what kind of return do you expect when you're delivering flyers like that, and what's it look like for you?
Typically, and I'm hoping that this will make sense, because the numbers, they usually do, but you have to watch it carefully. So I will typically now send out 17 to 23 flyer runs. Okay, right now it's to about 25,000 homes.
Yeah.
On that level, and at the height of my flyers, I was getting about a 0.002% return from that amount of frequency and that many flyers. So, you're spending a good chunk of change. I mean, easily between $60,000 and $80,000 a year. There's no doubt about that with Canada Post. That's the most expensive piece to the puzzle. On a 0.002% return on 25,000 flyers, if you're getting about 50 transactions through that, that's a pretty healthy return on investment.
Yep.
The challenge right now in our market is that we're closer to a 0.001. Some areas even less, some areas more.
Right.
But it's still a healthy return.
Yeah.
It's a little bit more daunting when you go through certain periods and you're getting nothing out of it, where the phone used to bring, 10, 15 good quality phone calls, or sorry, the flyers would bring those 10, 15 quality phone calls, which would lead to, at least 5 to 7 listings on each run. Perfect. Because you've got spin-off business and buyers and, if you're running a team, all of that too. But when it's a lot less, you've got to be able to convert at a high level as well. So there's much more beyond just, sending these things out and sticking to it. There's, hey, how are you leveling up your own skill set with, proper listing presentation, doing some enhanced digital farming, things like that, just to really increase your own conversion rate. And when it's such a competitive market, are you maximizing on, your commission percentages so that, all of this creates a big boost to that, expenditure that goes out.
Yeah. And I think that's where a lot of agents struggle, where you said you get those lulls, and that's when they start they pull out because they go, I haven't got a deal in a couple months, so I better pull out. And it's like, that's when you're actually gaining mind share in that time frame.
Totally.
And for the next round of when people are going to start returning or reaching out. And I've seen so many agents do that, where they get some deals out of it. They go, this is great. And then they don't get the exact same pace that they've had. Mm-hmm. And then they pull out. And it's like, you just lost a ton of money because you gave up on it. And it's critical to keep plugging through. And I always say you need to give it a solid year to test it. You don't test it in 2 months. But if you're 2 years in and you're not getting the returns, then it's time to really reevaluate. So for you, how often are you looking at it? You said yearly. Are you looking at neighborhood by neighborhood, or how are you deciding is it postal walk, or how are you deciding whether you're going to keep going?
So what I usually do is I look at how we've done on the year. Was there a return? And then really examining, and I think where many agents get it wrong is that they all want luxury, right? They all want the big price point. I've always been more turn and burn, like lower price point. They're going to pay me more. They're going to listen to what I say. Yeah. They're not going to, be the expert in the relationship. And so when I look at areas, it's pretty much, what you reference as postal walks. Yeah. I want to know how much inventory is changing year after year. And usually the same areas that I've stuck to, they're higher. But even right now, on 25,000 flyers, I might take that down a bit because we're so low inventory that I can see that just the number of homes changing hands. Yeah. It's kind of let me blast into the areas where there's more inventory changing, let a couple of these smaller areas fall off. And then if we want to go back to blanketing the whole, part of the city that we farm to, we'll do that.
That's a great point that you brought, because a lot of people don't think about that when they're doing farming, as far as how many sales happen. And I can share mine with my farm that there was on average for 5 years in a row, it was 250 to 260 sales a year out of that farm consistently. And then 2017 happened. We had that hot year, and then the prices went so high that no one was buying and selling, and the number of sales dropped to 180.
Yeah.
And then, so like if you were spending the same kind of money, like that's a substantial drop to go from 250 sales to 180. So if you're banking on that many sales in there from what you're doing, it's tough. But that's also when you can get market share, gain market share over that time frame, because you stick with it. The other agents are the ones, like you said, pulling out. They're not doing what they're giving up on it, and you can gain that market share back. So agents just have to be cognizant of there's going to be that ebb and flow of what happens in the community.
Most agents quit. Like that's just it. Like you said, you got to give it at least a year just to see how things are going. So many people that I've worked with over the years, they'll put out a couple sets of flyers and then they'll just stop. So they're just wasting their money, right? Because they're not understanding the principle behind it as far as, creating market share.
Yeah.
On the same sentence, so many agents go for that higher price point, and because it's so less frequent, they can't possibly commit to that either.
Yeah.
And if they really studied return on investment, you might as well do something totally different.
Yeah.
Not that it can't work, but you've got to be entrenched in that luxury market community. You've got to be, networking. You've got to be doing so many other things to really make that work. The other side of it is really understanding your own market. So for example, I've watched people come into London, where when the average sale price was, let's say, 300,000, they're using the same principles, frequency, marketing pieces as somebody in a market that is, 600,000.
Yeah.
They may get the result as far as the calls, the conversions, the deals. But when you start looking at that return, that's where some agents go broke, right? And I've almost been that way a long time ago when I tried my newspaper. It just didn't make sense for right here.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And that's, you got to know your market. You got to know the cost. And that's why you got to be watching it. And I've always said, start with a budget ahead of time that you're committed to. That if you lose that money, it's okay. And then hold it accountable after that year. So it's like, okay, for the next year, this is the money I'm going to spend. It's going to be my testing, kind of my guinea pig, and just try it. And then go, okay, now what kind of returns do I expect based on those results?
Exactly. Yeah.
Can I stick with that and keep going with it?
Totally.
One of the things that I've seen happen is agents will get in there and then they test stuff, and they test it too often, and they try new things. And I've said you should be adding in new strategies and new things. How often do you think, or would you add in a new approach or new, like you talk about online and different things like what's it look like for you as far as adding other things other than postcards or mailers?
Sure. I think that if you find something that works and you enjoy doing it, then go for it, right? And if you can add, and that would be, I guess, one of the key principles to my, perceived success, so to speak, is that I would, risk trying different things.
Yeah.
If they created a result, then I would look to scale.
Yeah.
But I think that if you get too wishy-washy, it's kind of like if you're an agent, you switch brokerages 7 times in 2 years, right? Yeah. Your clients are going to go, what is this person doing? What are they all about? And so if your message is constantly changing, having that key foundation, who you are, that you're in real estate, what you do, what value you provide, your calls to actions, understanding how a flyer should work. I think it's just the consistency of that is where the real magic happens inside of flyering.
And it goes with anything really too. It's especially in your farm. I had, I think it was Jenny Woloch. She talked about creating events and doing the same events every year, where a lot of people try to create new events, new fun, new exciting things. And she said the magic is you keep doing that event repeatedly, that people know that event's you. You can change what you do in the event and like add on some stuff to it. Then the cost, you can drive the cost down, you can keep it simple and consistent, and then people get to know that that's you doing that event rather than trying new things all the time. And I think it's a struggle for a lot of agents because they want it to be new and exciting and they want to add in new things, but there's something to be said about just being consistent with whatever message or whatever you're doing. Just keep hitting it home, and as long as you're getting the results, because you don't want
to. Sometimes less is more. It's. I think that we can get too caught up in trying to keep up, with other agents or what we see them doing. Sometimes it's not all that it's cracked up to be. Sometimes there's a different method behind their madness as far as why they're doing the things that they're doing, whether it's for a team or a development or there's so many different facets. And so to me, it's if you find something that works, that feels good, you enjoy doing it, you don't mind the risk, or it's not stressing you out like crazy, roll with that.
Yeah.
Rather than overcomplicating, because once we overcomplicate, we risk too much beyond our comfort zone. Not that it's not important to get out of our comfort zone, but we don't want to get into that place of, paralysis by analysis and just constantly waiting for, the deal to come in or the call to come in, because that's just a scarcity mindset, and it usually leads to exactly what we don't want.
Yeah. And like you said, understanding what they're doing behind that is important if you're going to replicate someone else.
Totally.
Because I use the example with billboards and park benches, and people say, well, a lot of big agents are using billboards and park benches, so I'm going to do that. And it's like, well, you didn't track their business of how they got there. Odds are they didn't get to their business at that level because of billboards and park benches. Mm-hmm. They're using it to keep their level. And then so people will see other agents doing stuff and go, well, how do they get to there? What got them there? Was it that strategy that they're doing now? And it's important to understand what's really happening behind the scenes. And
exactly. I mean, I just let go of about 10 bus benches, and I've never been one to do the billboards or bus benches, the odd one here and there, but nothing crazy.
Yeah.
I started, when I stepped back a little bit back into production, I said, I'm going to follow the Justin Havers of the world, or the people that are just, crushing it with this mega branding. You've got to have the right tools in place. And so my 10 out of the 30 that I wanted weren't in my ideal locations. They were in my farm area. But when I started analyzing what else I could do with that money, unless I was going to have them all, I just didn't want any of them.
Yeah.
But I see, people that know me, that know I sell a little bit of real estate, all of a sudden they start popping them up in, unique locations. They're not flyering. That's not going to get them anything.
Yeah, 100%.
Right. So there was a method to what I wanted to do. And you know what? I tried it. Didn't work. So you pull back, right? You reinvest somewhere else.
And like you mentioned earlier about, it's not just about the message itself, it's the skills behind it. And that's where a lot of agents miss that. I think that they focus on, okay, I can market and that's great. And you get the leads, but it's like, if you're not converting them, if your scripts aren't good, if you're not doing great presentations, if you're not understanding how to price properties and have those conversations, you can literally have this agent doing the same message and this agent doing it. And it's like, this agent will do 10 times as much business because they understand the process behind. So it's kind of having that whole system in place. So if someone was looking to get into doing flyering kind of at the level you're doing it at, what's some advice that you'd give an agent to get, if they're getting started and they've got not a huge budget, but a healthy budget? And
sure.
What advice would you give?
I would say, minimum 4,000 homes. My ideal, I think, is 8,000.
Okay.
And so looking at that, the burning the brand strategy going into the market. So knowing that you got to go real heavy up front, you're front loading your activity, understanding that about 17 to 23 runs is going to be, critical for the consistency factor of it.
Yeah.
The same flyer, and finding an area that is a higher turnover that you want to work in versus the neighborhood you grew up in, and you think that everybody knows you, and that's going to generate a ton of business. Because I've tried that one too, and it got me very, very little. Showing up with a pumpkin pie to my buddies from public school that I grew up with, and saying Happy Thanksgiving, that often leads to a lot greater return than flyering where my old stomping grounds were.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in that. Like you said, the price point of lower price point. I like to take the average price point and go just below that, because you end up getting the move up buyers into that, and you get the people that are at that price point. If you're selling them, they're usually moving up to a larger home. And there's so many agents that have this allure of luxury homes and longer days on market. The advertising costs are higher, the competition's higher. There's way more agents who are trying to fight for that same piece of the pie. Mm-hmm. And that average or below average price point is usually left open, and there's a ton of opportunity there.
The beautiful thing about real estate is it can be anything for anyone.
Exactly.
Right? So now years later, as a broker of record, and looking at some of the commission checks from some of those higher price point items, I go, wow, that's pretty nice compared to most of mine. But, then I go, do I want to get into, networking the way that they do to generate their business, and to, be really committed on a time perspective.
Yeah.
A lot more of a needy or high maintenance client, I should say.
Yeah.
It's not that we don't facilitate that, because we work with all types, but on the overall, it's looking at what do you want your business to look like for you?
Yeah. Exactly. And that's the most important thing when you're choosing, even if you're not doing farming, just understanding what is your business going to look like and what do you want to look like and
Yes.
who do you want to work with and what's your ideal type of client, and understanding that will then help you figure out what strategies you're going to put into place. And if
Absolutely.
you take a blanket one size fits all approach, then you probably won't be happy in your business unless you luckily happen to find the right model that works for you.
Multiple streams of business cultivation.
Yeah, that's great. So this is great advice. There's a ton of great information there. So we usually wrap up with your best book. So what would be a book that you recommend to our viewers?
Well, I mean, most that follow along with me know that I'm very much about, personal or spiritual development before the business side of things. I think that element of one's foundation is the critical factor to true, fulfillment, not necessarily success. And I found after, the ongoing study of human behavior, working with agents, team leaders, beginners to highly productive people, it's usually something personal that, is required for that kind of breakthrough.
Yeah.
So one of my favorites that I would recommend is a book called Dark Side of the Light Chasers.
Okay.
Dark Side of the Light Chasers by a gal by the name of Debbie Ford.
Okay.
And Debbie Ford's one of the great, spiritual teachers of our time, but she really focuses on integrating your whole self. So we're kind of the sum of all parts, and we've got our positives or negatives, and really integrating it all. And I've found that book has been one of the most influential as far as really uncovering some of those shadowy parts to really transmute that into light, which for me leads to more productivity, more fulfillment, more happiness, more joy, and all of those things.
That's great. We'll definitely put that in the notes and people can check that out.
Sure.
And if anyone wants to check out what you're up to as far as your coaching and your other businesses, how can people find out what you're up to and get a hold of you?
Sure. Facebook is probably the easiest place to connect. I've got multiple channels there, but my personal one, I have a group. It used to be a paid membership group called Real Estate with Purpose. So I opened up that for free during the start of COVID, just as a contribution, and just daily videos. I'll do a monthly webinar, things like that. So there's a couple hundred hours of video in there. Anytime that they check out the Realty Firm, in London or beyond, and they can hit me up anytime. My number as well, 519-859-5408. That's direct. And if anybody wants any information about who I am, what I do, or how I can support, I'm happy to.
Awesome. We'll put those in the notes as well so people can check that out. So I really appreciate you being on here. There's a ton of great information. And I know if someone listens to what you're saying, I think they'll have some success as long as they stick with it and be consistent. So thank you again for being on. And that was awesome.
Absolute honor, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for checking out today's episode. If you'd like more videos like this, be sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check out our Facebook page and our other social media channels. Looking forward to bringing you more great content like this, and happy farming.